Client Decision-Making and Communication. In this discussion, you will explore the connection between client decision-making processes and communication strategy. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to recognize the value in exploring other academic disciplines as it relates to client communication and persuasion, and understand the impact of emotion on rational, cognitive decision-making. Each client is unique. He or she brings a myriad of values, life circumstances, experiences, goals, objectives, and knowledge to the table. The more we know about the client, the ways in which he or she processes information, interacts with family and colleagues, and relates to money, the more successful we will be in communicating and connecting with the person. In this lesson, we will briefly examine 4 disciplines that impact communication and decision-making: cognitive psychology, systems theory, behavioral economics, and physiological psychology, including nonverbal communication and emotional intelligence. Let's briefly look at these disciplines in order to see the connection to client communication. Cognitive psychology. What makes our clients who they are? Cognitive psychology is a field of study that investigates the way that individuals formulate their attitudes, perceptions, perspectives, and mental processes. Cognitive psychiatrists seek to understand how personality, patterns, and habits are formed. Important influencers on personal development and mental processes include the family influence. For example, money tapes that were ingrained early in childhood and adolescence, identification with groups and culture, and life experience cohorts. For example, a Great Depression mentality. I attended a recent marketing workshop in which the presenter shared his company's research regarding generational characteristics. Specifically, he spoke about Generation X, the millennials, and centennials. One of the aha moments in that presentation for me was the idea of generational cohorts. The presenter's premise was that each generation moves through its formative years together, experiencing the same national and world events, influential leaders, economic conditions, and technical advancements. These common experiences help to create generational similarities in attitude, perceptions, and perspectives that can help us in understanding the client. Cognitive psychologists know that human beings exhibit habits or signature patterns in respect to the way they behave and think. Recognizing a client's habitual thought process can inform us about how to relate. For example, Williams and Miller quantified decision-making style into 5 categories: charismatic thinker, skeptic, follower, and controller. Their premise is that each category is a preferred communication strategy. The charismatic person can be influenced through clearly explained recommendations, supported by effective visuals that excite and enlighten. The thinker prefers a lot of data and alternative solutions. In dealing with the skeptical client, the most effective communication strategy is to build your credibility. The skeptic needs to first believe in you. The follower is influenced by hearing the success stories and testimonials from other clients and feedback from references. The controller needs to feel as though he or she is making the decision. The planner's role is to make that decision easy by providing the data and possible alternatives. It is easy to see how an understanding of the client's thought process can inform us about how best to communicate. A few years ago, I attended an FPA quarterly meeting in which the presenter characterize clients in respect to personality and natural communication style. Financial DNA comparisons include introversion versus extroversion, compliant versus dominant, detached versus compassion, unstructured versus structured, cautious versus adventurous, and concrete versus abstract. My takeaway from the discussion was that our communication should match the client's natural predisposition. For example, a client who is outgoing, abstract, and focused on relationships, compassionate, might prefer a meeting in a restaurant and react best to a discussion that focuses on how a planning recommendation relates to the family experience. In contrast, the structured, concrete, and cautious client might feel more comfortable meeting in the office, going through numbers, and focusing on quantitative outcomes. When there's a match in communication strategy with natural disposition, the meeting is more engaging and the relationship strengthens. Social systems theory explores group dynamics. The group might be the family, a social group, or a work group. Interaction between members mutually influence behavior because the more one seeks to be part of the group, the more one's behavior is influenced by socially defined norms and rules. The individual is inclined to act in a socially acceptable manner because that keeps the person in the group. In the family setting, values and priorities are handed down and often become part of a young person's money tapes. Behavior is often aligned with what the family considers to be acceptable. In the business setting, there are rules and culture which defines how business is conducted. On a broader scale, culture plays a huge role in personal value sets and behavior. In the early 1970s, social psychiatrist Irving Janis wrote about the phenomenon of groupthink. 3 groupthink tendencies are a strong adherence to group policies, acceptance of those beliefs as truth, and internal pressure to conform and to withhold criticisms. Client communication strategy that directly disrespects your client's group influence values will probably backfire. For example, given that your client is a dedicated member of the religious community, your recommendation to suspend tithing due to cash flow constraints will probably be met with strong resistance. You are attacking a non-negotiable ingrained behavior. A client who was raised by affluent parents who spent lavishly might look at you in disbelief as you mention building a monthly budget. An understanding of social systems theory helps us realize that there are better ways to communicate. One alternative is to promote client self-reflection. Ask important questions and then let the client think about it. Are your current attitudes and beliefs about money helping you reach your goals? Is your current spending pattern sustainable? How would you describe your financial health? The study of behavioral economics has informed us tremendously about how individuals make decisions, particularly under conditions of uncertainty. This discipline has transitioned us beyond the lens of the rational investor, the rational thinker. Rather, it gives us additional insight into how our clients actually make decisions. Simon Herbert offered the theory of bounded rationality in 1978. This theory advocated that decision-making is limited by information and time. Moreover, data overload impedes good decisions. Actual decisions are based on heuristics, which are mental shortcuts, family influences, history, and emotional reaction. In short, reason or cognition is insufficient. Our clients might be rational on occasion, but not all the time, particularly when the issue becomes emotional. Kahneman and Tversky expanded the conversation in 2002 with their work on prospect theory. This theory expounded that the investors weigh losses greater than gains. In other words, $1 of loss creates more pain than $1 of gain creates pleasure. Another significant aspect of the theory is that decisions are anchored to a reference point. So the investor who started with $100 and grew it to $200 no longer looks at the original amount when making decisions. Rather, decisions are based on the $200 portfolio value. Losses and gains are now measured from this high watermark. Rather than rational decisions based on all public knowledge, behavioral economics suggests that investors make decisions that are based on cognitive biases or mental shortcuts called heuristics. Common heuristics include overconfidence bias, overoptimism bias, illusion of control, confirmation bias, hindsight bias, data availability bias, anchoring, representativeness, status quo bias, and frame dependence bias. You'll learn about these issues in your behavioral finance course. And this knowledge will help you educate and communicate with your clients. How we frame a message influences the client's decision. For example, sticking to a budget has a negative connotation. I work hard, so why shouldn't I take a vacation to Hawaii? While reframing that message to take proactive control of your cash flows has a positive one. The client decides how best to use the funds to achieve multiple and sometimes conflicting goals. Market volatility or portfolio loss kicks in loss aversion. On the other hand, framing the message of market volatility as an opportunity that doesn't negatively impact your long-term goal receives a completely different response. Expectations also influence how events are perceived. That's why managing our clients' expectations is a critical job task. We realize that decisions are not made solely on cognition. In fact, you might have heard the expression that people buy on emotion and justify based on cognition. Clearly, money is an emotional experience. Behavioral economists identify numerous emotional biases, including fear and greed, regret, avoidance, feelings such as guilt, embarrassment, and responsibility, aversion to uncertainty, self-esteem, fear of loss, and even fear of success. In communicating with our clients, we must consider the emotions surrounding the situation. Similar to social systems theory, behavioral economists discuss group orientation. The herding instinct appears in financial markets as investors follow market buying or selling momentum, which creates bubbles and sell-offs. It's often a difficult conversation convincing a client that contrarian thinking makes sense, which means going against the crowd. Physiological psychiatrists study the behavioral manifestation of emotions. The largest portion of communication occurs non-verbally, including facial expressions and eye contact, body position and postures, head and hand gestures, and tone and pace of voice. Is the client leaning forward or leaning back? Are the arms positioned naturally at the side or crossed across their chest? Do any of the hand or leg gestures convey a message of being agitated or anxious? Did the tone, volume, or pace of the client's voice change? Emotional intelligence is the ability to monitor one's own feelings, recognize another person's feelings, and use that knowledge to inform how we can relate to others. Britt Andreatta describes personal competency as self-awareness of one's strengths and weaknesses, goals and values, feelings, and self-regulation, including the appropriate expression of emotion, managing stress, managing those triggers, and dealing with change and adversity. She quantifies relationship competence as an awareness of others, their values and goals, their emotions, feelings and concerns, and relationship building, including developing and influencing others, managing conflict, and initiating and facilitating change. Physiological psychology offers rich information in dealing with difficult, emotionally charged conversations. In this lesson, you were introduced to disciplines that relate to client decision-making, communication, and persuasion, and the impact of emotion on rational cognitive decision-making.